here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's September 5th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Si-young.
Good morning, Yeun.
Good morning, and Cheska Dainong.
Happy Tuesday, everyone.
Happy Tuesday. Both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Despite COVID-19 related restrictions mostly lifted, China isn't seeing a lot of international tourists visit its country. The South China Morning Post found that the number of foreign travelers in the first half of this year only reached 30% of that in the same period back in 2019. Industry insiders cited geopolitical tensions and China's global image since the pandemic as reasons why tourists are choosing not to visit. Moving on to news in Korea. Police haven't made it the most clear as to how fast we can drive during night and early morning hours at school zones. Originally, all school zones, regardless of time, limit the driver's speed to 30 kilometers per hour. But towards the end of August, police said they would trial run east school zone speed limits. This allows people to drive up to 50 kilometers per hour only between the times of 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. What's confusing, though, is that the trial run will only apply in 8 designated school zone areas. And last but not least, back in August, San Francisco became the first city in the world to give the green light to driverless taxi companies. Since allowing them to start their service, these robo-taxis reportedly block traffic and even cost lives. 2 of these autonomous taxis blocked an ambulance carrying a critically injured patient who later died at the hospital. And a few days later, a driverless taxi also collided with a fire truck. And city officials are planning to file a motion for a new hearing on whether this type of driverless taxi service should be expanded. If so, they're also negotiating what type of regulations need to be strengthened or newly introduced. Like many emerging industries, the robo-taxi companies are saying that further regulations could hamper their development. Now, Si-young, what do you think the middle ground should be on this issue then?
Yeah, I mean, autonomous driving has always been a hot topic because it's also not 100% secure yet. The technology is there, but there are so many unexpected anomalies as well on the streets. For example, the autonomous taxis have a certain degree of this technology secured, but as you could see, it did collide, it did make accidents. And the fact is, accidents are caused by not just the autonomous taxis themselves. If all cars were autonomous, it wouldn't be such a mistake. But of course, we have the normal people-driven cars as well. So if someone collides with the autonomous taxi, there's nothing the taxi could do. The most it could do is possibly turn around slightly to lessen the damage automatically. So I mean, in a sense, if there's a mix of autonomous driving, robot driving, as well as humans driving, it's going to be some sort of confusion, some sort of collision as well, regardless of the regulations.
All right. Now, Cheska, what do you think about this issue?
You know, I think this issue definitely extends, just beyond, robo-taxis, because, I mean, already has been a damage caused, but who's paying for the penalty? You know, a life has been taken, an accident has been made, damage has been done. But I think you can't bring a robo-taxi to court and then criminalize it. But on top of that, the self-driving services are also adopted. So let's say the driver is drunk.
Yeah.
And you are pulled out into an accident, whose fault is it? Maybe the driver might say, well, it was self-driving and I had no part in it. Yeah. Let's say that car caused an accident. Now, whose fault is it? So there's a lot of things to think about. I mean, is the license system going to change? Is it going to extend to who can drive now, people with disabilities, or is it going to limit it? I think there are tons to think about.
Yeah, I mean, for example, we even had the case of Tesla drivers drinking in the back. And they were like, oh yeah, this auto-driven, no, it's not my fault.
That was exactly it.
Especially also the taxi industry in Korea, they've been protesting a lot to better their working environment and things like that. So if there are robo-taxis, that could also be a really big issue as well.
Yeah, it could affect their livelihoods as well. But we're all for development. We're all for the advancement of development and seeing this technological milestone. But as you guys mentioned, I think there still needs to be a lot of negotiation done on this matter. And that was our news feed for this Tuesday. Let's switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. Here in Korea, a popular topic of debate has to do with how Korea treats and sentences its criminals. Today, we're going to focus specifically on how and when officials decide to disclose information about a suspect. Following recent stabbing attacks and rape incidents against innocent people, many in Korea have voluntarily taken on the title of civilian police. These so-called civilian police conduct their own investigations and research who the latest suspects are, and then disclose their personal information online. Under the current law, only police can reveal such info of a suspect in a, quote, serious criminal case to ensure public safety. The information they disclose includes a photo, the suspect's name, and age. Also, actual mugshots of criminals taken after their arrest can only be revealed with the suspect's consent. Backed by growing public opinion against the efficacy and legitimacy of the current law, more civilians are choosing to seek justice themselves while skipping formal procedures taken by police. For years, Korea has been discussing when and how to reveal the information behind a criminal suspect. Critics have long voiced their concerns that the current laws overly protect the rights of suspects. Under the current law, the police only disclose the information of a suspect under these three conditions. 1, when the crime committed was extremely heinous. 2, there's enough evidence pointing to the suspect. And 3, when it seems necessary to guarantee the public safety. Here at the studio, let's do a quick OX quiz to see if you guys agree with 3 conditions or the idea that the info of a suspect who hasn't been charged yet should be disclosed. So hold up O or X based on your answer.
Who hasn't been charged yet?
Yes, he's only a suspect. Here he is. Ready? Go.
Yeah.
Okay, so you say O. Why?
I mean, I do very much agree with the 3 conditions, but do not think a suspect who hasn't been charged yet should have his or her personal information disclosed. Not only does it go against the principle of presumption of innocence, but it may hinder the investigation itself if the public interferes based on the disclosed information, which has no sources as well. I mean, furthermore, the Article 71 of the Personal Information Protection Act stipulates that providing personal information to a third party without consent is subject to up to 5 years in prison or a fine of about 50 million won, which is around $40,000. So, I mean, privacy is a grave matter, whether or not, you're a criminal or yet to be indicted as well.
I see. What about you, Cheska? Why'd you hold up X?
Grace, wasn't the question, should we reveal
information? Should we reveal
So we shouldn't is my answer.
Okay.
So when it's a suspect, I think the main point is once the information is out, once it's done, it can't be undone. Meaning if the information is out, we can't go around and erase people's memories if the suspect is found innocent. So that is something that public can actually, the rage and the anger that they feel can spread like wildfire, and sometimes it just can't be contained. So I think it's a little bit dangerous to allow for revealing of information to the public when the suspect is still in question.
So you guys are saying we should be very cautious about that.
Yeah.
But what if the suspect has turned into a formal defendant? Would you be for revealing their information online?
I mean, personally, I would be. I mean, in this case, definitely yes for me. Even in the Korean media, quite often I find it bizarre that formally charged criminals have their faces blurred out, allowed to wear deep baseball caps with face masks.
They even
and
cover up the handcuffs, right, with
covering
jackets.
up the entirety of their faces, as well as the strange Korean tradition of covering up the handcuffs, as you said. The handcuffs wrists of the criminal with a jacket or a piece of cloth. I mean, however, under the principle of presumption of innocence again, meaning that the suspect is not treated as a criminal until after a trial and sentencing, it makes sense that handcuffs are not exposed to avoid prejudice. I mean, this goes back to 2005. It was the National Human Rights Commission of Korea who called for this, which became a norm after the Constitutional Court ruled it unconstitutional back in 2014.
I see. What about you, Cheska? What are your thoughts on that?
I think this is where Xiong and I kind of divide.
Okay.
I would think it's a very tricky area, but I still said no. I mean, trust me, I really think that the system should reveal the information, the faces of the criminal once he or she has been convicted. However, allowing the public to take on that task, I think is still dangerous because sometimes the law is very heavy and slow, for better or worse.
Of course,
but people's emotions are very, very fast. I mean, as you mentioned, there are a lot of violent crimes that are happening right now, and people feel very unsafe. So people are going out of their ways to protect themselves, but sometimes that goes further, revealing the information of the families or the acquaintances surrounding the offender, and then people fall into damage. And also, some people actually take advantage of this to create, like, influencers or YouTubers who are revealing more information than needed in order to create, more clickbaits or more outrage in the public.
They don't really care, all these influence YouTubers, they just want hot topic. They just want to say whatever, get the views and get the public going. And often that might lead to a really wrong case of judgment.
Exactly. And who's to penalize them, right? For all the damages that has happened to the people around
And I
them.
do understand that these civilians are doing that to seek justice, but at the end of the day, there are formal procedures that should be followed, just because, as you guys mentioned, there are places that we could overlook. For instance, if you reveal too much information about acquaintances or family members. Now, debates like this have flared up recently following a string of crimes that have shook up the country, right, Xiao?
Of course. Recently there has been a surge in the number of violent crimes in public, which has spread fear amongst many Koreans. Just this year so far, we've seen the disclosure of full suspect profiles, including mugshots and names, for 6 high-profile murder cases that are still under investigation. So, I mean, it was proceeded in accordance with the aforementioned 3 conditions, and compared to 2020, where there are only 2 cases of this full information disclosure the entire year, this is actually quite a big number this year. So especially after the recent cases of multiple random stabbings in crowded public areas, many everyday citizens have resorted to carrying out their own investigations and of course sharing information about the suspects on the web, mainly for the prevention of further crimes.
Right, but could you elaborate, Cheska, on how they're actually being able to do this? They seem to be great investigators.
I know, I wish I knew how to do it.
How are they getting all this information?
I think, spread of social media, definitely. I think that's one way they do it. And I think, as Xiang mentioned, because the situation is getting so serious, the quote, hero rises in troubled times. Now, the term hero is very, very debatable, but the situation, I think, is quite relevant because there are so many things happening that even the system can't take hold of or catch up with. The citizens feel like they need to step up in order to protect themselves because, let's face it, none of us want to be the next victim.
We don't.
Because we weren't able to protect ourselves in advance. So I think people kind of step up to become civilian police, to become the kind of heroes or the protectors if the system fails to do so.
Because enforcement of law actually takes time. It takes stages, it has due diligence, it's got to have evidences. So it does make sense, if you want to do something immediately, you got to kind of take it to your own hands. That's what the idea is, I guess.
Slow and careful, the law itself.
Right, so a lot of people are talking about whether this is the right direction to go, though, because it is illegal. Revealing someone's information, especially when they're still a suspect, is illegal here in Korea, especially if you're not police force. But why do you think, what are millennials and Gen Z, including yourselves, saying about this issue?
I mean, the young generation, of course, are very digital savvy, and the idea of vigilantism, of mob ideas, as well as taking the things into your own hands, is actually all can be justified in some hideous crimes. That's what the young people think. Of course, we're all especially after widespread complaints on some violent crime cases having very soft sentencing in recent cases of even rape, sometimes sexual abuse, even child abuse. A lot of people have been getting off quite easily in the public's eyes. So, I mean, that's what tempted a lot of the young generation to actually go about and take matters into their own hands. So, I mean, a lot of them, as I said, are digital savvy, and everybody has digital footprints on the web these days. So you could find where they live, their social media, their friends, the suspects' families and everything quite easily if you put in the effort. But you got to remember that these sort of investigating in your own sense, making judgments on your own behalf can have serious damages, and you got to think about the responsibilities to think about yourself.
Right, and as you mentioned, soft sentencing. A lot of people in our generation are saying the criminal law in Korea seems to be in the favor of suspects in a way, and the soft sentencing as well, because they're constantly comparing cases abroad, right?
Absolutely. So I think our generation definitely thinks it could use some improvement, and the system needs to bolster so that the public takes the last forefront. So I think the cases that are most quoted is Japan and the United States. So Japan, apparently, they have a guiding principle in order for the broadcasting system to reveal the information of the suspect. Now, the United States, as we know, is at the very forefront of the legal system.
Yeah.
So as we know, they reveal mugshots, photographs, and for sex offenders, they reveal, according to the Megan law, the address of the offender. So I think there's definitely more cases that show that South Korea could also use improvement to make us feel a little bit safer.
Right, and as much as it's a contentious issue that requires a lot of thinking, we asked our viewers to share their opinions, and here's what 3 of them had to say. Take a look at the screen to find out. So Waldo Isware said, I think it would depend on the crime, but the public should definitely be made aware of violent crime offenders. And Mola said, it depends on relevance really. If it is a minor crime that was heavily localized to a particular event stemming from some internal family conflict, I don't see why making the offender's info public would be beneficial. And Black Belt said, of course their identity should be revealed. Actions have consequences. Now, thanks to all our viewers who shared their thoughts on today's issue. And before we move on, we're going to be hearing from an attorney about what she thinks about our discussion so far. We'll include her in our talks right after this. To find out whether there is wiggle room to change the current laws regarding disclosure of suspects' information here in Korea, we're going to talk to an attorney in Seoul. It's Chun Sumi. Great to have you back on our show, Sumi.
Good morning, Sumi.
Hello.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
All right, as we've been mentioning so far, more civilians are taking the role as a police to disclose the information of a suspect. But what are some legal consequences they can face from that?
There are a lot of things about I want to say about the doxing. Because of you mentioned about the Japan's case, and the Korea's case also has a very tight and limited version of about the doxing can. The doxing can be a crime under the law of the Republic of Korea, and disclosure of information such as you mentioned before, address and residence, the registration number, and marital status, etc., without consent can be a crime. And in addition, it is more serious crime to allow an unspecified number of people to know sensitive information, medical records, or the divorce, or criminal history, or poverty status that they do not want to inform without consent. Unauthorized posting of such information on the internet for the purpose of slandering is punishable by up to 3 years in prison or a fine of up to 20 million won if the information is true. In particular, if the information is not true, it is punished by imprisonment for not more than 7 years or a fine of not more than 50 million won.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the problem is also the online space these days. It's so easy to disperse information, and dissemination of even wrong information goes about so quickly.
Yep.
And I mean, under the current law, when do the police give out a suspect's information, and how many times have they done it in the past, and how severe were the crimes?
Maybe in case of the suspect who has committed a violent crime or committed a sexual violence crime, the personal information can be disclosed to the public even before being tried. It can be disclosed only when the requirements such as the mean of the crime are cruel and the damage is serious, and there is a sufficient evidence of the suspect's crime. It will benefit the public interest, such as guaranteeing the public's right to know crime prevention, and suspect is not a minor. And if all of the above requirements are met, a personal disclosure committee will be held. And if the personal disclosure is decided by the committee and suspect face name, like you mentioned before, mugshot, and the age will be disclosed. Currently, there are about 50 suspects who have been disclosed. Most of them are murderers and some of the perpetrators of the Nth room, as you know. Nth room case are included.
The nth room. Yeah.
The Nth Room sex scandal case, yes, all right. And moving on to last question.
That's, that's very famous on the Netflix, as you know.
Yes. Briefly speaking, so if the government and the system were to become more active and open to revealing more criminals' information, do you think the public doxing rate or public's desire to reveal information would actually go down?
As a human rights lawyer, I have been working for a long time to help crime victims. They have been living in a pain for a long time. On the other hand, rather than reflecting on themselves, the perpetrators often show themselves living well, as if nothing had happened when they were punished. So personally, it is necessary to actively disclose the personal information for crime, for victims, and severe punishment against the perpetrators. However, this should only apply if there is a clear evidence, otherwise it could become a witch hunt and cause where intentioned victims, I think. So there is a need for the harmonious application of the law, I think.
All right, we'll hope to see that happen. Thank you so much, Sumi. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and we're going to wrap up with how we think about what we should be doing to deal with disclosing a suspect's information from now on. Very briefly, Xiang.
I mean, to be honest, right now I think is a good standard. The three conditions aforementioned are actually very, in the legal sense, very fair. I mean, it does make sense. Even a suspect should go fair trial before actually being accused of being confirmed as a convicted criminal. I mean, it might be the case that it must have been a wrong case as well. There might be something happening in the background that we didn't know, new evidences. So it should have the benefit of doubt, also a presumption of innocence, as I keep mentioning.
Right. What about you, Cheska?
I do agree that slander and libel is a damage that just can't be undone once it's done. So we have to be very careful about revealing the information. However, I do believe that the government should step up and actively inform the public about the procedure that they're going through, so that the public is aware, okay, we're going to receive the correct information once the case is moving forward. I think that's the assurance that we need.
That's the thing. That's the thing. If the police or the government keeps on revealing information, it's going to interfere with the investigation. And that's why people, that's why they try to gather most evidence as much as possible before actually announcing or before actually sentencing someone. Because if everybody knows that what's going on, in that house something's happened, we found this new evidence, it's someone might come by, look at it and be like, oh, look at me, the YouTuber might do that. It's not a good sign for the investigation itself as well. So I think that's the problem with the government.
I think the bigger issue, I think the bigger issue though is the reality is civilians are revealing the information and it's illegal. So there needs to be negotiation on how we should better regulate this, and we'll hope to see that coming on in the near future. Until then, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiang.
My pleasure.
And Cheska Dainon.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.